At my 70th birthday party, my son looked me in the eyes and said, "You've done nothing worth celebrating." The room went silent. I just smiled, thanked everyone for coming, and drove home alone. 2 weeks later, I made a single phone call that changed everything. By the time I was finished, my son's perfect life was crumbling around him, and the family he thought he controlled was about to learn exactly how much I'd sacrificed for them. Before I tell you what happened next, please subscribe to the channel and let me know where you're from in the comments. The invitation arrived in my mailbox on a Tuesday, a cream-colored envelope with my name written in my daughter-in-law Melanie's perfect cursive. Inside, an elegant card announced a surprise 70th birthday celebration for me, Howard Miller, to be held at my son James's house in 3 weeks' time. I stood at my kitchen counter, reading the invitation twice, a strange mix of emotions washing over me. James hadn't mentioned planning anything, which wasn't surprising given how little we spoke these days. Our weekly calls had dwindled to monthly, then to holidays only, and now to almost nothing at all. The last time I'd seen my grandchildren had been at Christmas, nearly 6 months ago. I ran my finger over the embossed lettering, wondering if this was Melanie's idea or if James had actually remembered his old man was turning 70. Probably Melanie. She was always conscious of appearances, of what the neighbors might think if they didn't throw a party for their aging what would the country club crowd say? Still, I was touched. Maybe this would be a chance to reconnect, to bridge the widening gap between me and my son, to spend some time with my grandkids, Emma and Liam, who were growing up too fast. I placed the invitation on my refrigerator with a magnet and tried not to get my hopes up too high. The day of the party arrived, with perfect early summer weather, sunshine streaming through my bedroom window. I dressed carefully in my best navy suit, the one Margaret had helped me pick out before cancer took her 5 years ago. I polished my shoes until I could see my reflection, trimmed my mustache, and dabbed on the cologne Margaret had always loved. 70 years old. How had that happened so quickly? I drove myself to James's house in the upscale neighborhood on the north side of town. A sprawling 2-story colonial with a 3-car garage and professionally landscaped yard. As I pulled into the driveway behind a line of luxury cars, I felt suddenly out of place in my 10-year-old Ford. I checked my watch. Exactly 2 p.m. Right on time. The front door opened before I could ring the bell, and there was Melanie, perfect as always in a designer dress, not a blonde hair out of place. "Howard, right on time," she said, air kissing my cheek. "Everyone's out back. James has the grill going." I followed her through the house, taking in the gleaming hardwood floors, the new furniture that hadn't been there at Christmas, the massive kitchen renovation that must have cost a fortune. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see perhaps 30 people gathered on the expansive patio, most of whom I didn't recognize. Surprise. A few voices called half-heartedly as I stepped outside. James stood at the massive stainless steel grill, drink in hand, chatting with a man in golf clothes. He looked up, nodded in my direction, but didn't immediately come over. My grandchildren rushed toward me, though, and for a moment, everything felt right in the world. Emma, now 13, hugged me tightly. "Happy birthday, Grandpa." Liam, 9 years old and growing like a weed, crashed into my legs. "Grandpa, did you bring me anything?" "Liam," Melanie scolded from behind me. "That's not polite." I laughed and ruffled his hair. "It's my birthday, buddy. You're supposed to bring me presents." I winked at him, "But check my coat pocket later. There might be something for both of you." Emma rolled her eyes in that way teenagers do, but I caught her smile. "Come meet my friends, Grandpa," she said, tugging at my hand. For the next hour, I made the rounds, shaking hands with James's business associates, Melanie's friends from the country club, neighbors I vaguely recognized from previous visits. A few of my own friends were there too, my fishing buddy, Frank, and his wife, my neighbor Ruth, and a couple of former colleagues from the construction company where I'd worked for 40 years. James finally approached me as I was getting a refill of iced tea. "Dad," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Happy birthday. Thanks for doing all this," I said, gesturing to the party. "It wasn't necessary, but it's nice to see everyone." James glanced around at the gathering. "It was Melanie's idea, really. She thought it would be good for the kids to celebrate with you." There was something in his tone I couldn't quite place, a distance that hadn't always been there. "Well, please thank her for me. The food is wonderful. It should be. The caterer cost enough." He checked his watch. "We should do the cake soon. People will want to start heading home." The party had only been going for an hour, but I nodded. "Whatever works best." Soon, Melanie was calling everyone to gather around a table where an elaborate cake had been set up. 70 candles blazed away, a genuine fire hazard that made everyone laugh. They sang happy birthday, and I made a wish I knew wouldn't come true, that my family could be whole again, that my son would look at me the way he used to. Speech, called Frank from the back of the crowd. Others took up the chant. Speech, speech. I cleared my throat, uncomfortable with being the center of attention but willing to say a few words. Thank you all for coming today. It means a lot to see so many friendly faces as I hit this milestone. 70 years. That's a lot of living. I smiled, looking around the gathering. I'm grateful for my family, for James and Melanie, for Emma and Liam, who bring me so much joy. I only wish Margaret could be here to see what fine grandchildren we have. My voice caught slightly at the mention of my late wife. I'm a lucky man in many ways, and I thank you for sharing this day with me. There was a smattering of applause, and I stepped back, ready to retreat from the spotlight, but James stepped forward, champagne flute in hand. I'd like to say something too, he announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet patio. He turned toward me, and I noticed his eyes were slightly glassy. He'd been drinking steadily all afternoon. To my father, Howard Miller. On his 70th birthday, the guests raised their glasses expectantly. 70 years, James continued. That's a long time to be on this earth, a lot of opportunities to make something of yourself, to build a legacy. He paused, and something in his expression made my stomach tighten. But what exactly are we celebrating today? A mediocre career as a construction foreman, a small house in a declining neighborhood, a life of settling for good enough. The silence around us deepened, grew uncomfortable. Melanie touched James's arm, whispering something in his ear, but he shrugged her off. You know what's funny, Dad? When Melanie suggested this party, I couldn't think of a single impressive thing you've done that we could celebrate. Nothing remarkable, nothing exceptional, just existence. He took another swig of champagne. So I guess that's what we're doing today, celebrating that you've managed to exist for 70 years. Congratulations on that accomplishment. The patio had gone completely silent. I could hear the ice melting in glasses, the distant sound of a lawnmower somewhere in the neighborhood. Every face was turned toward me, expressions ranging from shock to pity to morbid curiosity. I stood very still, James's words ringing in my ears. My chest felt tight, but I kept my expression neutral. Decades of practice hiding my emotions, serving me well in this moment. James, Melanie hissed, mortified. That's enough. But James wasn't finished. He looked me directly in the eyes and delivered the final blow. You've done nothing worth celebrating. Dad, nothing at all. Someone gasped. Emma burst into tears and ran into the house. Liam looked confused, his lower lip trembling. My old friend Frank took a step forward, but I raised my hand slightly. Stopping him, I carefully set down my plate on the nearest table. I looked at my son, this stranger who had once been my whole world, and I simply nodded once. Thank you all for coming, I said quietly to the assembled guests. I think I'll be going now. I walked slowly through the house, collected my car keys, and drove home in a fog of disbelief and pain. It wasn't until I was sitting in my empty house, in the worn recliner Margaret had loved to find me in, that I allowed the first tear to fall. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my modest house, the home where I'd raised James, where Margaret and I had built our life together. In my office, I stood looking at the wall of photographs: James's graduation from college, his wedding to Melanie, the birth of Emma and then Liam. My eyes drifted to my filing cabinet, and a strange calm settled over me. I hadn't done nothing with my life, and it was time my son learned exactly what I had done, especially for him. I'd been protecting him for too long, shielding him from the consequences of his choices, enabling his ingratitude. That would end now. I picked up my phone and made a calendar reminder for Monday morning. One phone call to my attorney would set everything in motion. After decades of sacrifice, it was finally time for the truth. The morning after the birthday disaster, I woke early, a lifetime of construction work making it impossible to sleep past 5:30. Even in retirement, I made my coffee, strong and black, and sat at my kitchen table as the sun began to rise, illuminating the modest but well-kept yard Margaret had loved so much. As I sat there, memories flooded back, a lifetime of sacrifices that James had either forgotten or never known about. The sacrifices that, according to him, amounted to nothing worth celebrating. I'd met Margaret when we were both 19, working summer jobs at the local hardware store. She was the prettiest girl I'd ever seen, with a laugh that could light up the whole room. We married young, just 21, everyone saying it wouldn't last. We proved them wrong with 44 years together before cancer took her from me. We'd wanted a big family. But complications from James's birth meant he would be our only child. Maybe that was part of the problem. Maybe we spoiled him. Focused too much on giving him everything we hadn't had. I sipped my coffee and remembered the small apartment we'd lived in when James was born. How Margaret and I would whisper at night about our dreams for him. He would go to college, have opportunities we never had. We would make sure of it, and we did. I took every overtime shift offered at the construction company, working 60, sometimes 70 hours a week. Margaret took in sewing, then found part-time work when James started school. Every extra dollar went into a college fund for him. We drove used cars, clipped coupons, never took vacations. But we were happy, the three of us, in our little family unit. When James was 12, I was offered a promotion to foreman, better pay, better hours, but it meant turning down the regional manager position that would have required moving to another state. Margaret and I talked it through and decided that keeping James in his school, near his friends and the only support system he'd known, was more important than my career advancement. A mediocre career as a construction foreman, James had called it yesterday. He had no idea. I finished my coffee and moved to my small home office, unlocking the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. Inside were neatly labeled folders, a paper trail of my life's sacrifices. The college folder was the thickest. James had been accepted to several state schools with decent scholarship offers, but he'd set his heart on Westfield University, a prestigious private college with an elite business program and a network of connections that would set him up for life. The tuition was astronomical, more than Margaret and I made in a year. I pulled out the home equity loan papers from 1995. We'd borrowed against our house, the one asset we had, to make up the difference between James's scholarships and the full cost of Westfield, $147,000 over 4 years. An amount that had seemed impossible when we first saw it. We can't, Margaret had said, her face pale when we ran the numbers. We have to, I'd replied. This is his future. We'd made it work. I took a second job doing weekend construction, and Margaret started cleaning houses for extra cash. We never told James where the money was coming from. We wanted him to focus on his studies, not worry about money. He assumed the scholarships covered everything, and we never corrected him. I moved to the next folder, labeled wedding. The loan documents from 2005 were still there. $52,000 for the ceremony and reception Melanie had her heart set on. James had called me, panic in his voice, saying they might have to postpone the wedding because they couldn't afford what Melanie wanted. Her parents had some money but weren't willing to contribute much. Don't worry about it, I'd told him. Your mother and I will take care of it. Margaret had been worried. Howard, that's our retirement money. We'll make more, I'd assured her. Even though I was already 55 and knew my highest earning years were behind me. Our son is only getting married once. I'd cashed in a significant portion of my 401k, paying the penalties and taxes, to give James and Melanie the wedding of their dreams. They'd never asked how we managed it. Next came the folder labeled house down payment. After the wedding, James and Melanie had lived in a nice apartment while they saved for a house. But after Emma was born, they were desperate for more space. The housing market was hot, and they were consistently outbid on properties. I remember the phone call clearly. James, sounding defeated, telling me they'd lost out on another house. We'll never be able to save enough for a decent down payment in this market. Dad, we might have to move to an apartment in a different school district. The next day, I'd gone to the bank and withdrawn $80,000 from our savings money that Margaret and I had been putting aside for decades for our own retirement. I'd driven to James's office and handed him a cashier's check. What's this? He'd asked, staring at the amount. Your down payment, I'd said simply. Find a good house in a good school district for my granddaughter. He'd been speechless, then emotional. Dad, I can't accept this. It's too much. You can, and you will, I'd told him. This is what parents do. What I didn't tell him was that I'd just given him every penny of our emergency fund, or that I'd have to work at least 5 years longer than planned to rebuild our safety net. A week later, they'd closed on the colonial house where the disastrous birthday party had just been held. The house where I'd been told I'd done nothing worth celebrating. The next folder contained medical bills. Margaret's cancer had been aggressive, requiring treatments that our insurance didn't fully cover. By that point, James was doing well at his investment firm, making more in his annual bonus than I made in a year. I'd considered asking for help with the mounting medical costs but could never bring myself to do it. Instead, I'd taken out a third mortgage on our house and picked up night security work to help pay for Margaret's treatments. I was 65 then, working 2 jobs while spending every possible moment with my dying wife. James had visited occasionally, always rushing off to some important meeting or event. "I'm just so busy, Dad," he'd explain, checking his watch. "The firm is considering me for partner. I can't afford to take time off right now." I never complained, never made him feel guilty. Margaret and I had raised him to pursue his dreams. After all, we'd gotten what we wanted. He was successful, with a beautiful family and a bright future. The final folder was labeled simply Loan. 2020. 3 years ago. After James had made partner at his firm, he'd called me in a panic. He'd made some investments that hadn't panned out, borrowed against his future bonuses, and found himself in serious financial trouble. He needed $175,000 to cover his position before his firm discovered the problem, or he could lose everything: his job, possibly even his professional licenses. I was retired by then, living on Social Security and what remained of my reduced 401k, but I still had one asset: my house, fully paid off after decades of mortgage payments. "I don't know, James," I'd said hesitantly. "That's pretty much everything I have." "Dad, I'm desperate," he'd pleaded. "I wouldn't ask if there was any other way. I'll pay you back with interest, I promise." So I'd taken out a reverse mortgage on my home. The home where James had grown up, where Margaret and I had built our life together. I'd given him the money with a handwritten agreement that he'd repay me within 5 years. That had been 3 years ago. I hadn't seen a single payment. I gathered all the folders together, adding bank statements showing transfers to James and Melanie over the years when they'd needed help with property taxes, unexpected car repairs, or the costly renovation of their kitchen last year. Small amounts compared to the larger loans, but they added up to thousands more. In total, I'd given them just over $600,000 over the past 30 years, more than $500,000 from my mediocre life, my settling for good enough. Money that should have funded a comfortable retirement for Margaret and me, that could have allowed me to care for her properly in her final years instead of working night shifts while she suffered. I closed the filing cabinet and looked at the stack of papers on my desk. Tomorrow, I would call my attorney, Richard Garvey, and set things in motion. It was time for James to learn exactly what his father had sacrificed for him and what it would mean now that I was reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Monday morning arrived with a summer thunderstorm, rain lashing against the windows as I made my way to Richard Garvey's law office downtown. I'd been friends with Richard for 30 years. Since we'd met when his firm handled the legal work for some of my construction company's projects, he'd helped Margaret and me with our wills, with the various loans and mortgages we'd taken out over the years, always charging us a fraction of his usual fee. His office was in one of the older buildings downtown, a dignified space with dark wood paneling and leather chairs that had seen better days. Richard, now in his 70s himself, rose to greet me as his secretary showed me in. "Howard," he said warmly, grasping my hand. "It's good to see you, though I gather from your phone call that this isn't a social visit." "No, it's not," I replied, taking a seat across from his desk. "I need your help, Richard." "It's about James." Richard's expression sobered. He'd known James since he was a boy, had watched him grow up, go off to college, build his career. "What's happened?" I spent the next half hour laying out everything: the birthday party, humiliation, the years of financial support, the unrepaid loan, all of it. Richard listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and removed his reading glasses. "I'm sorry, Howard, truly. No father should be treated that way, especially not after all you've done." "I need to know my options," I said. "The loan agreement we signed, is it legally binding?" Richard nodded slowly. "Yes, it is. Handwritten agreements can be fully enforceable contracts when they contain all the essential elements, which yours does. I drafted it for you, remember." "But Howard, are you sure you want to go down this road? Legal action against your own son, ... "I'm not taking legal action yet," I clarified. "I want to know what I could do, what leverage I have. And there's something else." I leaned forward, lowering my voice slightly. "James doesn't know that I hold the mortgage on his house." Richard's eyebrows shot up. "Explain." "When James and Melanie were having trouble getting approved for their mortgage, this was back when lending requirements tightened after the 2008 crash. Didn't just give them the down payment. I actually purchased the house through a limited liability company I set up. And they've been making payments to the company, not to a bank. They think it's a traditional mortgage, but legally, I own the house. They've built some equity, but not much with the refinances they've done to pull cash out for renovations and other expenses. Richard stared at me. And they don't know. I shook my head. James asked me to handle the paperwork because I understood that construction stuff. He just signed where I told him to sign. The LLC documents list me as the sole member. But the name Miller family? Investments doesn't make that obvious. So you're telling me that you actually own the house your son thinks he's been buying for the past 15 years? Yes, I said simply, and I want to know what would happen if I decided to sell it. Richard sat back, a look of astonishment on his face. Well, legally, you have every right to sell the property. The LLC is the owner of record. James and Melanie are essentially tenants with an option to buy, if that's how the paperwork is structured. He paused. But Howard, this would devastate them. They could lose their home. I know, I said quietly. I don't want to do that. What I want is for my son to understand what I've sacrificed for him, to acknowledge it, and to start treating me with some basic human respect. Richard nodded thoughtfully. Here's what we could do. I can draft a formal demand letter for the $175,000 loan repayment. The terms give you the right to demand full repayment with 30 days' notice. We'll send that first. If he doesn't respond appropriately, then we can discuss next steps regarding the house. He looked at me carefully. Are you absolutely sure about this, Howard? Once we start down this path, I'm sure, I said firmly. I've spent my entire life protecting James from consequences. I won't spend what years I have left being disrespected and unappreciated. He's a grown man. It's time he learned that words and actions have consequences. Richard nodded and made some notes. I'll have the demand letter ready for your review by tomorrow. We'll send it certified mail so he can't claim he didn't receive it. As I left Richard's office, the rain had stopped, and watery sunlight was breaking through the clouds. I felt lighter somehow, as though a decision I'd been avoiding for years had finally been made. On the drive home, my phone rang through the car's speakers. It was Emma, my granddaughter. Grandpa. Her voice sounded small, uncertain. Hi, sweetheart. Everything okay? She hesitated. I wanted to say sorry about Dad at your party. What he said was really mean and not true. My heart squeezed in my chest. Thank you, Emma. That means a lot to me. Mom and Dad had a big fight about it after you left. Mom said Dad was way out of line and had embarrassed everyone. Dad said you'd get over it. She paused. Are you going to get over it, Grandpa? I considered my answer carefully. I love your father very much, Emma. Nothing will change that, but sometimes, adults need to work through difficult things together. Your dad and I will figure it out. Okay, she said, sounding relieved. Can I still come over sometime to bake cookies like we used to? Mom said to ask you. Of course you can, I said warmly. You and Liam are welcome anytime. You know that. After I hung up, I found myself smiling slightly. At least something good had come from this mess, a reminder of the connection I had with my grandchildren. A connection worth preserving no matter what happened between James and me. The next day, Richard called to say the demand letter was ready. I drove to his office to review it. A simple, straightforward document stating that pursuant to our agreement dated March 15, 2020, I was formally requesting repayment of the $175,000 loan, plus the agreed-upon 3% annual interest, within 30 days. The total came to $190,125. If he doesn't pay within 30 days, I asked. Then we have options, Richard said. We can file a lawsuit to recover the money, we can discuss the house situation, or we can try to negotiate a payment plan. But let's start here and see how he responds. I signed the letter, and Richard's assistant took it to be sent by certified mail. Now we wait, Richard said, walking me to the door. Howard, for what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. There's a difference between supporting your children and enabling behavior that hurts you. I nodded, grateful for his understanding. I just hope James sees it that way eventually. But James didn't see it that way at all. 2 days later, on Thursday evening, he showed up at my front door unannounced, his face flushed with anger, the demand letter clutched in his hand. What the hell is this? He demanded, pushing past me into the living room. I closed the door calmly. It's a formal request for repayment of the loan I gave you 3 years ago. The loan you promised to start repaying and haven't. Are you serious right now? After everything Melanie and I have done for you, the birthday party, inviting you to holidays, letting you see the kids. He paced the room, gesturing wildly. And this is how you repay us, with some legal threat. I sat down in my recliner, maintaining my composure. James, Please sit down so we can discuss this like adults. I don't want to sit down. I want to know why my own father is suddenly acting like a loan shark. He waved the letter in my face. $190,000 in 30 days. Where exactly do you think I'm going to get that kind of money? From the same place you get the money for your country club membership, or Melanie's new SUV, or the kitchen renovation that cost more than I paid for this entire house. I said evenly. You make over $300,000 a year, James. Don't pretend you can't afford to repay what you owe me. He stopped pacing and stared at me. Is this about what I said at the party? I'd had a few drinks. You're really going to hold a grudge over some stupid comment? This isn't about the party, I said, although we both knew that wasn't entirely true. This is about the fact that you borrowed a significant amount of money from me with a clear agreement to repay it, and you haven't made any effort to do so, because I assumed you didn't really need it back. He exploded. You live like this. He gestured around my modest living room, by choice. You've always been content with ... less. I thought the money was a gift, like everything else you've given us over the years. I felt my composure slipping. Everything I've given you. Do you have any idea how much that amounts to, James? Do you have any concept of the sacrifices your mother and I made so you could have the life you have now? Oh, here we go. He scoffed. The martyr routine. We sacrificed so much for you, James. Well, isn't that what parents are supposed to do? Sacrifice for their children. I stood up slowly, my voice dangerously quiet. Yes, parents sacrifice for their children, but children are supposed to be grateful, respectful, and eventually, they're supposed to take care of themselves, not take advantage of their parents' generosity for decades. Take advantage? He laughed incredulously. When have I ever taken advantage of you? The $147,000 for Westfield that your mother and I paid by taking out a home equity loan and working second jobs, I said, ticking off on my fingers. The $52,000 for your wedding. The $80,000 for your house down payment. The countless times you've needed help with property taxes, car repairs, renovations. And now, the $175,000 loan you've made no attempt to repay. That's over $600,000, James. More than $500,000 that your mother and I gave you from our mediocre lives. He had the grace to look momentarily stunned, but quickly recovered. I never asked for most of that. You offered. And anyway, that's what family does. They help each other. Yes, family helps each other, I agreed. So where were you when your mother was dying and I was working night shifts to pay for her treatments? Where were you when I needed help repairing the roof last year? Where's the help going in the other direction, James? He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. I've been busy, building my career, raising my kids. And I respect that, I said. But don't stand in my house and tell me I've done nothing worth celebrating when everything you have, your education, your house, your career was built on sacrifices I made for you. So what now? He demanded. You expect me to come up with $190,000 in 30 days? Or what? You'll sue your own son. I expect you to acknowledge the debt and make arrangements to repay it, I said firmly. And I expect you to apologize for what you said at the party. He stared at me in disbelief. An apology? That's what this is really about. No, this is about respect, James. Something you seem to have forgotten how to show me. He shoved the letter into his pocket. I'll have my lawyer look at this. Don't expect to see the kids anytime soon if this is how you're going to be. The threat hit me like a physical blow. But I kept my expression neutral. That would be a shame for them, I think. But you do what you feel is right. He stormed out without another word, slamming the door behind him. I sank back into my chair, suddenly exhausted. The confrontation had gone almost exactly as I'd expected, yet I still felt a profound sadness. How had we reached this point? Where had I gone wrong as a father? But as I sat there in the growing darkness, I knew I couldn't back down now. The storm was gathering and we would all have to weather it, one way or another. A week passed with no word from James. I tried to go about my normal routine: morning coffee, the newspaper, lunch with Frank on Wednesday, volunteering at the Veterans Center on Thursday, but the silence weighed on me. I found myself checking my phone more often than usual, hoping for a text or call, maybe from Melanie or even from the grandkids. But there was nothing. On Monday morning, exactly 10 days after I'd sent the demand letter, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find not James, but Melanie, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. Her normally perfect hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail, and she wasn't wearing her usual full makeup. "Howard," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger, "we need to talk." I stepped aside to let her in. noticing she carried a manila folder similar to the ones in my filing cabinet. "Would you like some coffee?" I offered, attempting basic hospitality. "No," she replied curtly, sitting on the edge of my sofa. "I'm here about this ridiculous loan situation. James is too angry to come himself, so here I am, cleaning up the mess as usual." I sat across from her in my recliner. I wasn't aware there was a mess to clean up. The situation seems straightforward to me. James borrowed money and agreed to repay it. Melanie opened the folder and pulled out the handwritten loan agreement. This napkin contract is what you're basing this whole drama on. It wouldn't stand up in court for 5 minutes. Richard Garvey disagrees, I said calmly, referring to my attorney. He says it has all the necessary elements of a binding contract, but I'm not interested in going to court, Melanie. I'm interested in James taking responsibility for his obligations. Let's cut to the chase, she said, closing the folder with a snap. We don't have $190,000 in liquid assets right now. Most of our money is tied up in investments, the house, the kids' college funds. James makes over $300,000 a year, I pointed out again. And we have expenses to match. The mortgage, property taxes, insurance, the country club membership, private school for the kids, our cars, ... double quotes, she trailed off, perhaps realizing how this sounded to me. Those are choices, Melanie. Choices about how to spend your money. Just like repaying your debt to me would be a choice. She crossed her arms defensively. Why now? Howard, you've gone 3 years without mentioning this loan. What's really going on here? I studied her for a moment. Melanie had always been polished, ambitious, focused on appearances and status. But underneath that, I'd always sensed a genuine love for James and the children. She wasn't a bad person, just sometimes blind to how her priorities affected others. The timing isn't a mystery, Melanie, I said quietly. Your husband told me, in front of family and friends, that I've done nothing worth celebrating in 70 years of life. That I'm mediocre. That my life amounts to nothing remarkable. Something flickered in her eyes, discomfort, perhaps even a hint of shame. James was drunk, she said, but with less conviction than before. He didn't mean it. I think he did, I replied. And it made me realize that it's time to set the record straight. It's time for James to understand exactly what I've done with my life, and how much of it was spent making his easier. She shifted uncomfortably on the sofa. So this is punishment for a hurtful comment. You're going to financially ruin us over wounded pride. This isn't about punishment, I said firmly. It's about responsibility. The loan is real. The obligation to repay it is real. If you and James can't see that, then perhaps we have nothing more to discuss. Melanie's professional demeanor reasserted itself. She straightened her posture and fixed me with the kind of look I imagined she used in boardroom negotiations. Fine, let's talk numbers then. We can offer $25,000 now, and $1,000 a month after that, until it's paid off. That's the best we can do. I did the quick math in my head. At that rate, it would take nearly 14 years to repay the loan. I'd be 84 years old by then, if I lived that long. That's not acceptable, I said. The terms of the agreement were clear. Full repayment within 5 years, which gives you 2 more years. I've already waited 3 without a single payment. Then what do you want? She asked, exasperation evident in her voice. I want James to acknowledge his debt, financial and otherwise. I want him to apologize for what he said at the party. And I want a reasonable repayment plan that doesn't stretch into my 90s. And if we can't meet these demands, I looked her directly in the eyes, then I'll have no choice but to pursue other options to recover what I'm owed. Melanie stood up abruptly. Is that a threat? Because if you're threatening legal action, we have lawyers too, Howard, good ones. It's not a threat, I said calmly. It's simply a statement of fact. Actions have consequences, Melanie, something you and James seem to have forgotten. She gathered her folder and purse, her movements tight with anger. I'll discuss this with James. But don't expect a warm response. You've crossed a line here. I think we both know who crossed the line first, I replied, walking her to the door. Give my love to the grandchildren. She didn't respond to that, just strode quickly to her luxury SUV and drove away, leaving me standing in the doorway of my modest home, wondering if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. 3 more days passed without contact. I checked in with Richard, who advised me to hold steady and wait for them to make the next move. They're testing your resolve, he said. Don't blink first. On Friday morning, my phone rang. It was James's number. I braced myself and answered. Dad, his voice was cold, professional, his business voice. We need to talk about this loan situation in person. Can we meet at my office today at noon? His office, not my house, or even a neutral location. Establishing home field advantage. As Richard would say, I can do that. I agreed. Good 12th floor of the Magnuson building downtown. Tell reception you're here to see James Miller. I know where your office is. James, I've been there before. A pause. Right? Noon. Then. He hung up without saying goodbye. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing my best suit again, wanting to project dignity and seriousness. This wasn't a social call. This was business, and I needed to be taken seriously. The Magnuson building dominated the downtown skyline. All glass and steel, housing some of the city's most prestigious firms. I remembered how proud I'd been when James had first gotten his job there 15 years ago, how I'd bragged to my coworkers about my son, the financial wizard. The reception area of Miller Weston Financial Partners was designed to impress, with sleek, modern furniture, abstract art on the walls, and sweeping views of the city. The young woman at the desk smiled professionally when I approached. I'm Howard Miller. I have an appointment with James Miller at noon. She checked her computer. Yes, Mr. Miller. Please have a seat. Someone will be with you shortly. I sat in one of the expensive-looking chairs, noticing how everyone who passed through the reception area was dressed impeccably, moving with purpose and confidence. This was James's world, not mine. And I felt the subtle power dynamic at play. After 15 minutes a delay, I suspected was intentional. A young man in a tailored suit approached me. Mr. Miller, I'm Kevin, James's assistant. Please follow me. He led me through a maze of glass-walled offices and open workspaces to a corner office with James's name on the door. Inside, James sat behind an imposing desk, with Melanie and a man I didn't recognize seated in chairs to his right. Dad, James nodded as I entered. Thank you for coming. This is Alan Westbrook, our attorney. I glanced at the lawyer, then back at James. I wasn't aware this was going to be a legal meeting. I haven't brought my attorney. This isn't a formal legal proceeding, the attorney said smoothly. Just a discussion about how to resolve this situation amicably. Please, have a seat. I sat across from them, 3 against 1, feeling the imbalance acutely, but I kept my expression neutral, my posture straight. James folded his hands on his desk. Dad, we've reviewed your demand for repayment. And while we acknowledge that you did loan us money in 2020, we find the timeline for repayment unreasonable given our current financial situation. Financial situation, I echoed. James, you drive a $90,000 car. You belong to a country club with a $50,000 annual membership fee. Your kitchen renovation last year cost more than I paid for my entire house. The lawyer cut in. Mr. Miller, my client's lifestyle choices aren't relevant to this discussion. What's relevant is their current ability to repay this loan on the timeline you're demanding. Actually, I countered, their lifestyle choices are extremely relevant, because they demonstrate a clear ability to pay that's being directed elsewhere. They're choosing country club memberships and luxury cars over repaying their debt to me. James's face flushed slightly. We've prepared a counterproposal, he said, sliding a document across the desk. We can offer $30,000 immediately, followed by monthly payments of $2,000 until the debt is satisfied. That would clear the loan in just under 7 years. I didn't touch the paper. The original agreement was for full repayment within 5 years. We're already 3 years in, and you haven't made a single payment. Circumstances change, Melanie interjected. When James borrowed that money, we expected his bonus structure to continue as it had been. The pandemic affected the market, and his compensation hasn't grown as projected. And yet your spending has, I observed. The new SUV, the kitchen renovation, Emma's private school tuition that doubled last year when you moved her to Westfield Academy. James's eyes narrowed. Have you been monitoring our spending? I've been paying attention, I corrected, because that's what parents do. We pay attention to our children, even when they don't return the favor. The lawyer cleared his throat. Let's stay focused on the issue at hand. My clients are offering a reasonable repayment plan that acknowledges the debt while working within their current financial parameters. I would advise you to consider this offer carefully before pursuing more aggressive options. I looked directly at James, ignoring the lawyer. I want to speak with my son alone. I don't think that's advisable at this stage, the attorney began, but James held up a hand. It's fine, Alan. Dad and I can talk privately for a few minutes. He looked at Melanie. Give us the room. She hesitated, then nodded, standing up. The lawyer followed reluctantly, closing the door behind them. Once we were alone, James's professional facade slipped slightly. What's this really about? Dad, is it really about the money, or is it about what I said at the party? It's about both, I admitted. And it's about much more than that. It's about 30 years of sacrifices that you've either forgotten or never appreciated. It's about watching you build a life of privilege on the foundation I provided, then dismissing that foundation as worthless. I was drunk, he said, the excuse sounding hollow even to him, I suspected. I didn't mean it the way it came out. I think you did, I replied quietly. I think somewhere along the way, you started believing that your success was entirely that the advantages your mother and I gave you at great personal cost were just what you were entitled to as our son. He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. What do you want from me, Dad? A tearful apology, a public declaration of gratitude. Will that satisfy your wounded pride? This isn't about pride, I said. It's about respect. And yes, an apology would be a start. But more than that, I want you to really understand what I've done for you, the choices I made, the opportunities I sacrificed. Also, you could have the life you have now. And if I don't meet your emotional demands, you'll what? Sue me. Take my house. Destroy my family's security. I stared at him, suddenly realizing something. You're afraid, I said slowly. You're not just angry or afraid. Why? What aren't you telling me about your financial situation, James? A flash of panic crossed his face before he could mask it. Nothing. Our finances are fine. But I'd spent decades reading blueprints, spotting flaws in foundations before they became catastrophic. I could see the cracks in my son's confidence, the subtle signs of stress I'd missed before. You're in trouble again, aren't you? I asked quietly. That's why you can't repay the loan. It's not about unwillingness, it's about inability. He stood up abruptly and walked to the window, his back to me. The firm had some setbacks last quarter. Nothing serious, just a temporary cash flow issue. But yes, things are tighter than they appear. The house, the cars, the schools, it's all leveraged. Dad, it's what people expect in my position. So you're living beyond your means to maintain appearances. He turned back to face me, a hint of desperation in his eyes. You don't understand. In my world, appearance is reality. If clients think I'm struggling, they pull their investments. If partners think I'm not successful enough, I get passed over for advancement. I can't show weakness, even to your father. Especially to you, he said, the words coming out in a rush. Do you know how hard it is to be the son of a man like you? So stoic, so self-sacrificing, so damn perfect in your working-class hero routine, never complaining, never asking for help, just silently judging me for not measuring up to your standard of manhood. I was stunned. Is that how you see me? As judging you? How could I not? Everything I have, you remind me, came from you. My education, my career, my house, all built on your sacrifice. The great Howard Miller, who gave up everything for his family. How could I ever repay that? Not just the money, but the moral debt. For the first time, I glimpsed something I'd never fully understood. My son felt crushed under the weight of my sacrifices. What I'd seen as love, he'd experienced as an unbearable obligation he could never fulfill. James, I said carefully, I never meant for you to feel that way. Everything I did freely, because I wanted to. Not to create a debt you could never repay. But now you're calling in that debt, he said bitterly, both the financial one and the moral one. Because you denied it existed, I replied. At my birthday party, you didn't just insult me, you erased everything I've done, everything I've been. Do you understand how deeply that cut? He sank back into his chair, suddenly looking exhausted. I do, and I'm sorry for that. I was angry about other things, and I took it out on you. It was cruel and unfair. It wasn't the full apology I wanted, but it was a start. Thank you for acknowledging that. James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that reminded me painfully of his teenage self. So where do we go from here? I can't magically produce $190,000 in 30 days. I'm not even sure I can manage the counterproposal we offered, not without selling investments at a loss or taking out more debt. I don't want to ruin you, James, I never did, but I need you to understand something important. I leaned forward, making sure I had his full attention. Your house? The one you think you've been paying a mortgage on for the past 15 years. I own it. The blood drained from his face. What are you talking about? Miller Family Investments, LLC. The company that holds your mortgage. I'm the sole owner. When you were having trouble getting approved for a traditional mortgage, I didn't just give you the down payment. I bought the house through the LLC and set up what amounts to a rent-to-own arrangement. Legally, I own your house. James stared at me in shock. That's not possible. We've been making payments for 15 years. Yes, to my company. You've built some equity, but not much. Given how many times you've refinanced to pull cash out for renovations and other expenses. You signed all the paperwork, James. You just never bothered to read it carefully. He stood up, anger and fear warring on his face. This is a hell of a thing to spring on me now. Were you planning to tell me this before or after you evicted my family from our home? I'm not planning to evict anyone, I said calmly. I'm telling you this because you need to understand the full picture before we decide how to move forward. I've been protecting you from the consequences of your financial decisions for decades. I'm not going to do that anymore. The door opened, and Melanie peered in. Everything okay in here? We heard raised voices. James waved her in. Dad has just informed me that he owns our house. Apparently has all along. Melanie froze, looking from James to me and back again. What does that mean? It means, I said, standing up, that we need to have a very honest conversation about finances, about family, and about the future. All of us, together. No more lawyers. No more evasions. No more pretending. Is this blackmail? Melanie asked, her voice tight. You'll take our home if we don't meet your demands. No, I said firmly. This is reality. Something that's been in short supply in your lives lately. I'm simply removing the protective bubble I've kept around James since he was a child. It's long overdue. What do you want? James asked, sounding defeated. I want dinner at my house. Sunday at 6. Both of you. The kids, no excuses. We're going to lay everything on the table, all the financial entanglements, all the unspoken resentments, all of it. And then we're going to figure out a path forward as a family. They exchanged glances. A silent communication passing between them. Fine, James said finally. Sunday at 6. I nodded and turned to leave, but stopped at the door. One more thing. The apology I want. It needs to happen then. In front of the children. They need to understand that words have power, and that when we hurt someone, we acknowledge it and make amends. I left before they could respond. Walking through the impressive offices and out into the summer sunshine, I had set in motion something that couldn't be reversed. Sunday would either heal the breach in our family or widen it beyond repair. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on solid ground, no longer sinking under the weight of unacknowledged sacrifices and unspoken truths. Sunday arrived clear and warm. A perfect summer evening. I spent the morning preparing, not just the meal pot roast, Margaret's recipe, with roasted potatoes and her famous apple pie for dessert, but also gathering the documents I would need. The mortgage papers for the house, the loan agreement, bank statements showing decades of financial support, everything laid out in clear plastic folders on my dining room table. I had briefly considered having Richard present for this meeting but decided against it. This needed to be family only, no outside observers to make it feel like a negotiation or legal proceeding. At 5 minutes to 6, a car pulled into my driveway. I watched through the window as James helped Emma and Liam out of the back seat. Melanie emerging from the passenger side, all of them dressed more casually than I had expected. James carried a bottle of wine, Melanie a small bouquet of flowers. Peace offerings, perhaps. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. Grandpa. Liam launched himself at me, wrapping his arms around my waist. Emma followed more sedately. But her hug was just as warm. We've missed you, she said softly. I've missed you too, I replied, meaning it more than I could express. James and Melanie hung back slightly, uncertain of their welcome. Come in, I said, stepping aside. Dinner's almost ready. There was an awkward moment in the living room as they took seats, the adults painfully polite, the children oblivious to the tension. Something smells amazing, Melanie offered. Is that pot roast? Margaret's recipe, I confirmed. It was always James's favorite as a boy. A flicker of genuine emotion crossed James's face. Mom made the best pot roast in the world. She did, I agreed, grateful for this small moment of connection. Emma, Liam, would you like to help me bring the food to the table? Your dad and I need to talk for a minute. The children followed me into the kitchen, eager to help, leaving James and Melanie alone briefly. I could hear them whispering to each other but couldn't make out the words. Is Dad in trouble? Emma asked quietly as she carried a bowl of salad. Why do you ask that? She gave me a look far too knowing for her 13 years. Because he's been super stressed all week, and he and Mom have been arguing behind closed doors, and they made us promise to be on our absolute best behavior. Tonight, your dad and I are working through some adult issues, I said carefully, but you and Liam aren't in trouble, and you don't need to worry about being on your absolute best behavior. Just be yourselves. She nodded, seeming relieved when we returned to the dining room with the food. James was studying the documents I'd laid out on one end of the table. We can look at those after dinner, I said, setting down the pot roast. Let's enjoy the meal first. Dinner began stiffly but gradually relaxed as the children's natural exuberance broke through the adults' tension. Liam regaled us with stories from his summer day camp, and Emma shared news about her art class and the mural she was helping paint at the community center. Grandpa, did you know Dad used to paint too? Emma said between bites of pot roast. He showed me some of his old paintings from when he was in high school. They're really good. I glanced at James in surprise. I didn't know you'd kept those. He looked embarrassed. Just a few. They're nothing special. They are too special, Emma insisted, especially the one of the lighthouse. Mom wants to get it framed. Your father was very talented, I told her. He won a district art competition when he was 16. There was talk of him applying to art school. Really? Emma looked at her father with new interest. You never told me that. James shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't a practical career path. Your grandmother and I would have supported whatever path you chose. I said, quietly. We just wanted you to be happy. An awkward silence fell over the table. Who wants apple pie? I asked, standing to clear the dinner plates. Margaret's recipe again, though I've never been able to make it quite as well as she did. As I served dessert, I could feel the inevitable conversation looming. When everyone had finished eating, I took a deep breath. Emma, Liam, I need to talk with your parents about some important adult matters. Would you mind watching TV in the living room for a little while? There's a new nature documentary I recorded that I think you'd enjoy. The children looked between the three adults, sensing the seriousness of the moment. Is everyone going to start yelling? Liam asked bluntly. No, I promised. No yelling, just talking. After they had settled in the living room with the documentary playing, I returned to the dining table where James and Melanie waited, tension evident in their postures. Before we get to the financial matters, I said, sitting down, there's something important we need to address. I looked directly at James. At my birthday party, you said some things that were deeply hurtful. You said I'd done nothing worth celebrating in 70 years of life, that I'd had a mediocre career and settled for good enough. James had the grace to look ashamed. Dad, I held up my hand. Let me finish. Those words didn't just hurt me. They affected Emma and Liam. They're old enough to understand what was said, and Emma in particular was very upset by it. Melanie glanced toward the living room, concern on her face. She hasn't said anything to us about it. She wouldn't, I said. She's trying to be loyal to both her father and her grandfather, but she called me the next day to apologize for what James said. A 13-year-old girl felt she needed to apologize for her father's behavior. Think about that for a moment. James looked stricken. I had no idea. No, you didn't. Because you were too focused on your own feelings to consider how your words affected others, including your children, who were watching and learning from you about how to treat family. James stared down at the table, his face flushed with shame. You're right. What I said was inexcusable. I was drunk, I was stressed about work, and I lashed out at the easiest target. I'm sorry, Dad. Truly sorry. It wasn't the public apology in front of the children that I'd demanded, but looking at my son's genuine remorse, I realized that wasn't necessary anymore. This was real, not performative. Thank you, I said simply. I accept your apology. Some of the tension drained from the room, but we all knew we were just getting to the hard part. Now, I said, pulling forward the folders of documents, let's talk about the financial situation, all of it. For the next hour, I laid it all out for them, the college tuition, the wedding expenses, the house down payment, the various loans and gifts over the years, culminating in the $175,000 loan from 2020. As I spoke, I showed them bank statements, loan agreements, the LLC paperwork for the house, everything documented in black and white. In total, I concluded, I've provided financial support of just over $600,000 over the past 30 years. Money that came from my mediocre career, my settling for good enough. James and Melanie sat in stunned silence, the magnitude of my support finally clear to them. I had no idea, Melanie said finally. James told me you'd helped with the down payment on the house, but I never knew about the LLC arrangement or most of these other things. We need to be completely honest with each other now, I said, looking at James. You said at your office that things were tight financially. How bad is it really? James hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. It's bad, Dad. The firm lost some major clients last year. My bonus was cut by 60%, but we'd already committed to expenses based on what I thought I'd be earning. We've been living on credit cards and home equity loans for months. The country club membership, the cars, the renovations. Image, Melanie admitted, in James's world, the appearance of success is essential. We couldn't let anyone know we were struggling. So instead of adjusting your lifestyle to match your actual income, you doubled down on the facade, I observed. And now you're drowning in debt. Yes, James said simply. If we had to repay your loan in full right now, we'd have to sell the house, cash out the kids' college funds, and probably still declare bankruptcy. I absorbed this information, turning it over in my mind. My son, who had seemed so successful, so secure in his position, was in fact living on the edge of financial disaster, kept afloat by credit and appearances. Here's what we're going to do, I said finally. I'm going to restructure the loan. No payments for 1 year, giving you time to get your finances in order. After that, $1,000 per month for 10 years. No interest. James stared at me. Why would you do that after everything that's happened? Because you're my son, and despite recent events, I love you. But there are conditions. Of course there are. Melanie murmured. First, you need to be honest with Emma and Liam about your financial situation. Not the details, but they need to understand that adjustments in lifestyle are coming and why. James nodded slowly. That's fair. Second, you need to get professional financial counseling. Real counseling. Not just advice from your colleagues who are probably in similar situations. You need to learn to live within your means. We can do that, Melanie agreed. Third, family dinners. Once a month, minimum. Here or at your place. I don't care. But we need to rebuild this family. And that won't happen if we only see each other when there's a crisis. Absolutely, James said, sounding relieved. We'd like that too. And finally, I said, reaching for the folder containing the house documents. I'm transferring ownership of the house to both of you, free and clear. They stared at me in disbelief. What? Melanie whispered. The house will be yours, officially. No more LLC. No more hidden arrangements. But, I emphasized, raising a finger, you need to stop using it as an ATM. No more home equity loans or cash-out refinancing. It's your children's security. Not a piggy bank to maintain appearances. James shook his head, struggling to process what I was saying. Dad, I don't know what to say. Why would you do this after how I've treated you? Because I've realized something important, I said, looking between them. The money, the house, none of that matters compared to our family. When your mother died, I poured everything I had into making sure you and your family were secure. But somewhere along the way, I think I started using that financial support as a substitute for the emotional connection we lost. I pushed you away, James admitted. After Mom died, seeing you hurt so much, I couldn't handle it. It was easier to focus on my career, on building my own family, than to face that grief with you. And I let you, I said, because facing it alone was easier than asking for help. We've both made mistakes, James. Melanie reached for her husband's hand, then surprised me by extending her other hand to me across the table. So we start fresh. All of us. I took her offered hand, and after a moment, James placed his hand on top of ours. A new beginning, he agreed. The moment was interrupted by Liam's voice from the doorway. Is the grown-up talk over? The show ended, and we're hungry again. The three of us looked at each other and laughed. The tension of the past weeks finally breaking. Come here, both of you, I called to the children. Your dad has something he wants to say. Emma and Liam approached cautiously, sensing the changed atmosphere in the room. James stood and knelt down to their eye level. I owe your grandfather an apology, he said, his voice steady. At his birthday party, I said some very unkind things that weren't true. I was wrong to say them, and I'm sorry, very sorry. It's okay, Dad, Liam said, patting his father's shoulder. Everyone says dumb stuff sometimes. Emma was more perceptive. Did Grandpa forgive you? James looked up at me, a question in his eyes. Yes, I said, meaning it completely now. I've forgiven your dad, and he's forgiven me for some things too. That's what family does. We forgive each other and move forward together. Emma came over and hugged me tightly. I knew you would. You're the best grandpa ever. As I held my granddaughter, with my grandson climbing onto his father's lap and Melanie smiling genuinely for the first time that evening, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since Margaret died. We had a long way to go, many difficult conversations ahead, but the foundation was being rebuilt, stronger perhaps for having been broken and repaired. 2 months passed, bringing cooler autumn weather and significant changes to our family dynamics. True to their word, James and Melanie had consulted a financial advisor and begun the difficult process of adjusting their lifestyle to match their actual income. The country club membership was the first thing to go, followed by trading in their luxury cars for more modest vehicles. They'd been honest with the children as I'd asked, explaining in age-appropriate ways that they needed to be more careful with money. Emma had taken it in stride, but Liam had been initially upset about not being able to attend the expensive summer camp his friends were planning for next year. But it's not fair, he'd complained during one of our now irregular family dinners. All my friends'll be there. Life isn't always fair, buddy, James had told him, with a quick glance in my direction. Sometimes we have to make hard choices, but we'll find another camp that's just as fun and fits our budget better. I'd felt a surge of pride hearing my son talk that way. He was growing into the responsible adult I'd always hoped he'd become, just taking a more circuitous route to get there. The monthly dinners had become something we all looked forward to, alternating between my house and theirs. Sometimes we'd play board games afterward, or look through old photo albums, sharing stories about Margaret and the family history the children had never known. James and I had begun spending time together, one-on-one as well, reviving our long-abandoned tradition of Saturday morning fishing trips. On one such outing, sitting quietly in our small boat on the lake, James had opened up about the pressures he'd been feeling at work. The whole culture is toxic, he admitted. Everyone pretending they're doing better than they are, spending money they don't have to keep up appearances. And for what? So clients will trust us with their money. There's something fundamentally wrong with that. What are you going to do about it? I'd asked, casting my line into the still water. I don't know yet, but something needs to change. I don't want Emma and Liam growing up with the values I've been modeling. Another small step forward. Another reason for hope. The legal transfer of the house had been completed the previous week. The paperwork filed and recorded with the county. James and Melanie were now the official owners, with no strings attached. Richard had thought I was being foolish. You're giving up your biggest piece of leverage, he'd warned. What if they backslide? What if the apologies and promises don't stick? Then I'll have lost a house but maybe saved a family. I'd replied, it's worth the risk. Now, as I prepared for another family dinner, this one special, to celebrate my 71st birthday, reflected on how much had changed in just a year. Last October, I'd been a lonely old man whose son couldn't be bothered to call regularly. Now, I was an integral part of their lives again, and they of mine. The doorbell rang promptly at 6. One of the changes in James: he was punctual now, no longer assuming everyone would wait for him. Happy birthday, Dad. He greeted me warmly, carrying a gift bag in one hand and a bottle of my favorite whiskey in the other. Emma and Liam rushed past him, engulfing me in hugs, while Melanie followed with a homemade cake. No expensive bakery creation this time, but something she'd made herself. Slightly lopsided but made with love. You didn't have to go to all this trouble, I said, genuinely touched. Yes, we did, Melanie insisted. After everything that happened last year, we wanted to make this birthday special, one worth celebrating. The emphasis on worth celebrating wasn't lost on me, a deliberate reference to James's cruel words a year ago, now being consciously replaced with something better. We enjoyed a wonderful dinner together, the conversation flowing naturally now, without the strain and tension that had marked our interactions for so long. The children regaled me with stories from school. James talked about a community volunteer project he'd started participating in on weekends, and Melanie shared her newfound interest in home cooking rather than ordering expensive takeout. After dinner, James cleared his throat and tapped his glass with a spoon, calling for everyone's attention. Dad, he began, his expression serious but warm. Last year, I said something unforgivable to you. I said you'd done nothing worth celebrating in 70 years. I couldn't have been more wrong. He glanced at Melanie, who nodded encouragingly. The past few months have taught me so much about what truly matters in life, James continued. You didn't build a fortune or become famous, that's true. But what you did build was far more valuable, a foundation of love and sacrifice that made everything in my life possible. Emma and Liam were watching their father with rapt attention. This was important for them to hear, too. You and Mom worked extra jobs to pay for my education. You gave up your own dreams and opportunities to make sure I had the best possible start in life. You handed over your retirement savings to help me buy a house. And when I made a terrible financial mistake 3 years ago, you saved me from ruin without a second thought. James's voice caught slightly. That's not nothing, Dad, that's everything. And I was too blind, too caught up in my own ego to see it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope, which he handed to me. "We wanted to give you something special for your birthday this year, something that acknowledges the kind of man you truly are." I opened the envelope carefully, finding inside a certificate and a letter. The certificate was from the local community college, establishing the Howard and Margaret Miller Scholarship Fund for students from working class backgrounds pursuing trades and construction careers. "We've endowed it with $50,000 to start," Melanie explained. "It's the first payment on what we owe you, but instead of paying it back to you, we're paying it forward in your name. Each year, 2 students will receive financial support to help them pursue the kind of honest, hard-working career that you had," James added, "a career that might not make headlines, but that builds communities and supports families." I stared at the certificate, too moved to speak for a moment. "And that's not all," James continued, gesturing to the letter. "Read that." The letter was from the director of the Veterans Center where I volunteered. It informed me that a new workshop space was being dedicated in my name, funded by a donation from James and Melanie, to expand the woodworking therapy program I'd helped establish. "You've spent years quietly helping those veterans rebuild their lives," James said. "It's time that work was recognized and supported properly." I looked up at my son, my vision blurring with tears. "I don't know what to say." "There's one more thing," James said, reaching for Melanie's hand. "We've made an announcement to our friends and colleagues. I've stepped down from the partnership track at the firm to take a less demanding position, one that will allow me more time with the family and less pressure to maintain appearances. We're selling the big house," Melanie added. "We've found a smaller place in a nice neighborhood with good schools. It's actually not far from here. 3 blocks away," Emma chimed in excitedly. "We can walk to Grandpa's house whenever we want." I looked around at their faces, my son, finally embracing the values that truly mattered. Melanie, supporting him in this significant change of direction. My grandchildren, excited about being closer to me. This was worth more than any financial repayment, more than any public apology. "Thank you," I said simply, knowing they understood all that those 2 words contained. Later, as they were preparing to leave, James hung back while Melanie took the children to the car. "Dad," he said quietly, "I need you to know something. When I said those things at your party last year, I wasn't just being cruel. I was projecting my own failures onto you." "What do you mean?" "I had everything: the prestigious job, the big house, the status symbols, and I was miserable. Deep down, I knew I'd built my life on sand, on appearances and debt and constant anxiety about keeping up the facade." He looked at me steadily. "But you built your life on bedrock, on real work, honest relationships, and genuine service to others. I was jealous of your peace, your certainty, your authenticity." So I lashed out. I squeezed his shoulder. "It takes a big man to recognize something like that, let alone admit it." "I'm trying to be the kind of man you are," he said, "the kind of man who builds things that last." As I watched them drive away, I thought about the announcement James had made, not just the scholarship and the workshop, but the fundamental changes they were making to their lives. The decision to step away from the pursuit of status and appearance in favor of substance and connection. A year ago, I'd been publicly humiliated by my son's cruel words. Today, he had made a different kind of announcement, one that had silenced his own demons and healed wounds I'd thought might never close. Margaret would have been proud. I know I was. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee, looking out at the autumn leaves beginning to turn. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Thanks for the best birthday party ever, Grandpa. See you Saturday for fishing with Dad and Liam." I smiled, thinking about all that had transpired in the past year. The pain and confrontation had been necessary. It turned out the only way to clear away decades of unspoken resentments and expectations. Sometimes, the most valuable things in life can emerge from our darkest moments, if we're brave enough to face them honestly. My son had said I'd done nothing worth celebrating. In trying to prove him wrong, I'd nearly torn our family apart. But in the end, what was truly worth celebrating wasn't the financial support I'd provided or even the sacrifices I'd made. It was the courage to speak truth, to demand respect, and ultimately, to forgive. That was a legacy worth passing on. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to the channel. Let us know in the comments if you've ever had to stand up for yourself against family members who took you for granted. Your stories inspire us to create more content like this. To listen to another revenge story that will leave you speechless, click the video on the left.